book of Daniel, prophetic timelines, empires rising and falling, and the mystery of the beast. Big topics, right? But stick with me, because today we're unpacking one of the most important pieces in our Let the Reader Understand Bible Study series. Welcome to the Rooted Ground podcast. If you've been following along, you know prophecy isn't just random predictions. It's a pattern, a thread woven through history, pointing us forward. And now, in part 4 of chapter 2, we've hit a turning point. Who or what is the beast? Where did it come from? And what does Daniel's vision reveal about its true nature? Grab your Bible, take notes. This is one study you don't want to miss.
Well, I want to thank you for taking the time for watching this video, which may not be so brief. This probably will be one of our longer videos, but just bear with me. If all possible, persist through, take it in pieces. But this is part 4 of chapter 2, in which we've been examining the nature of the beast as we've been going down this Let the Reader Understand Bible study series. So I want us to get us in, and this chapter, this part 4 will be a rather pivotal piece. So when it comes to understanding the true nature of who the beast, what the beast is, where they're from, the Antichrist, etc., this is truly a pivotal section. So take the time, go through it. If need be, do it in pieces. Now, as if I can get the slides to go through here. There we go. If you recall what I've mentioned in most of the videos, and of course back in chapter 1, the focus of this teaching series is really on Matthew 24:15. Of course, we're all familiar with Matthew 24 when it comes to end time teaching, but it wasn't until we get to verse 15 that we find Jesus giving a pivot in regards to what to look for. And of course, that's what gave us this teaching to begin doing. But he told them, that when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel, stand where it shouldn't, let the reader understand. And so we're going to continue down that Daniel path. For the last 2 sections, we've been doing that. And in fact, we will touch on one of the first mentions of the abomination being spoken of. But just a quick review, if you go back to part 2, when we were looking at Daniel chapter 2, of course, that was the Nebuchadnezzar's dream, the statue, head of gold, the chest and arms of silver, the belly and thighs of brass, the legs of iron, and the feet and toes of iron and clay, and of course, the stone cut out of a mountain without hands coming to destroy that entire statue. And we looked at that nature of the beast, even what this was being shown to be coming from, and as you'll notice with the maps I pulled from part 2, that DNA gives us a definite, unique lineage that comes from the head of that statue, being Babylon. And I won't go down in the details here, just go back and watch part 2, but we're going to continue this thread with Daniel. And of course, in part 3, we continued that element in Daniel 8, in which we examined how when Alexander's empire broke apart, what we happened to say from the statue was the belly and thighs of brass, that in Daniel 8, we have the goat and the ram. And of course, that dominant, prominent horn being Alexander the Great. And then when it broke away, Alexander dying in Babylon, up came 4 of his generals. And of course, there was wars, etc., that lasted for several hundred years until eventually we had a region, once again, that became the dominant. Matter of fact, there were 2 regions. There was the Seleucid and the Ptolemy. And of course, the map you see here, the picture, is that northern region. And of course, what I had touched on in part 3 is the beast once again is coming from this region you see. So we're definitely seeing a DNA record, a DNA lineage from the Babylonian to the Medes, Persians to Alexander. And last time we looked at how it was venturing over that northern portion. So we're going to continue with this, but before we do, I want us to go back to Daniel chapter 2 and touch on it. And some of you may have noticed this, that I didn't deal with the legs of iron. And of course, there's a purpose to that, because I knew with what we were, what I was going to be teaching today was needed before we really looked at what those iron legs deal with. And of course, just as this artist's rendition of that statue has those legs, just like a human body, coming out from the belly thighs. The thighs will extend into those iron legs. They're an appendage, an extension of the thighs. So what we're going to be looking at is a little bit about, well, what's that fourth kingdom? Well, if you go by the traditional teaching, of course, it is Rome. And provides you the map that's being shown here. And of course, matter of fact, most study Bibles, matter of fact, the one I'm holding here, which is a Holman's study Bible, in the notes, it says the very same thing. It gives, the head of gold being Babylon, the chest and arms of silver being Media-Persia, Greece here, the belly and thighs of brass. But then when you get down to the notes, and this, like I said, it's in most study Bibles. You'll probably find it in Dates and Schofields and most of any type of study Bible. They're going to tell you this is Rome. Now, what I want you to keep in mind here, of course, is look at that map, and at some other point, go back and look at the maps we've been looking about that DNA trace. But that's just me and my little rabbit trail. But the most common, teaching is this is Rome, turning toward the west, and that the Antichrist, as you follow this lineage down, that iron turning to iron and clay begins to look at, I've heard teachings of the revived Roman Empire and such. And so where does this come from? Why did it make its way into our study Bibles and into most of the prophetic teaching when it comes to last days issues? As a matter of fact, the Left Behind series places the Antichrist as coming from Romania, in Rome, in the Roman Empire area. And I can't remember his full name, but I know Carpathia was part of it. But it is a very traditional minded teaching that has been in play for a long time. Matter of fact, when I first got into teaching and learning on the prophecy, it's the direction I went. I know I've more than likely stood in the pulpit and talked about this. But where did it come from? Where did this teaching really occur? And that's the focus of what we have here in this video and in this section of chapter 2. And it's looking at Daniel chapter 9, specifically verses 22 through 27, but we're going to hone in on one specific verse. And of course, this is the 70 weeks of Daniel. And so what we're seeing here with this Roman Empire, like I said, being interpreted within most study Bibles, I mean, all you got to do is, if you have a study Bible, open it up to Daniel chapter 2 and see what it says in regards to those legs of iron. And more than likely, it's going to be telling you the Roman Empire. Well, it really hinges, this is that pivot point, it hinges on this chapter because of what it states. And the scripture, of course, all the verses from 22 to 27, it's the 70 weeks of Daniel. And I'm not going to read all these elements, but it talks, Daniel is being told that basically there's going to come a point in time that the temple is going to be told to be rebuilt, in which it was. We've got other evidences for that. And then there was going to come a period of time that it's going to go forward. And without going into that rabbit trail too much, what we find here is the Lord laying out a time sequence, and history reports that these things occurred according to that time period in years. But then when we get down here, it talks about, after 62 weeks, an anointed one shall be cut off and shall have nothing. So it takes us all the way up to the time of Christ. and all the way till the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. And it says, the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. And of course, once again, this goes from when Daniel and the children of Israel are in captivity in Babylon to when all of a sudden, hey, the temple is going to be rebuilt. And it was, all the way up to the point in which all of a sudden there was going to be a destruction of that. And notice what it says. And its end shall come with a flood, and to the end there shall be war. A war had to take place in the area of the sanctuary. And it says these desolations are decreed. And what's more, it talks about that prince which is to come. He shall make a strong covenant with many. And if you happen to have watched my latest update, it's update number 2, I talked about this scripture. That the Antichrist would be making an agreement, a covenant. So here we have this Antichrist, the later prince that is to come, making a covenant with many for 1 week, and in the middle of that week, he's going to put it into the things. And of course, this is where we get that abomination that maketh desolate. So we get that first part that as we're doing this teaching, that Matthew 24:15 tells us that we as a reader need to understand. But that's for a later time, and I'll touch on that. What I want to focus on right here is specifically that portion of verse 26, because the interpretation of Daniel chapter 2, that statue, the legs of iron, fall on these words. And I want you to take notice. This is just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 words a whole teaching is based upon. It says, and the people of the prince who is to come. So the people of the Antichrist shall destroy Jerusalem and the temple. And of course, when you get into the history, and that this is one of those videos that's what we're going to do. We're going to dive into a little bit of the history, not too deep of a dive because we don't have near the time to do that. But we're going to look at the history, and here we can find that the Jewish wars, remember what it said, that wars were to come, that Jewish wars began in 66 AD. And it was the Jews revolting against Rome's authority. And of course, Titus with his army came in, his Roman legions, and they arrived at the northernmost wall of Jerusalem, Passover, 70 AD. And that was the beginning of the onslaught in which Jerusalem would be destroyed by Titus and his Roman legions. And of course, that's the mindset. This was the Roman army, and they were destroying. This was that the people of the prince that was to come. So the Bible prophecy teachers and those that have looked at this in the past and shared has talked about it's the Roman army. So those legs of iron fall to Rome. Well, we're going to dive a little deeper. And of course, what we find here, this is a statue of Titus. And of course, what we see as the Roman legions, this just happens to be an artist portrayal. But just to put that 926 and a little bit more amplified version, if you will, this one might be, an amplified version of what was being said. It says, the people, in other words, those with ancestral lineage of the prince, the Antichrist, to come in the last days, shall destroy the city, Jerusalem, and the sanctuary, the Jewish temple. So this is saying the people of that ancestral lineage of the Antichrist that will arise in the last day, those people are going to come in and destroy Jerusalem and the temple. And of course, as I said, being a pivotal piece, without taking a dive into history, we're going to take it on face value and say, this was the Roman army. This was led by Titus. He came in and they attacked the city, destroyed Jerusalem, destroyed the temple, and so on. Yes, but, and this is where, with a little bit of looking into the literature, as I share with my doctoral students, a little bit of digging into history gives us even more understanding of what occurred. First and foremost, Titus and those that officers that were in control, the true Romans, we'll say this, these, Titus and the other generals and stuff, they were Roman. They did not want to burn down Jerusalem and the temple. Now, this happens to come from Josephus' work, War, Book 6, Chapter 4. You'll notice that when the siege was going on, there was an individual that came to Titus, told him there was a fire, that, with what this artist's rendition is at the bottom, that there's a fire going on, and that the holy house, the temple, was burning. And it said Titus ran and was giving an order to put the fire out. And many of his commanders telling the legions, don't do this. So it says there was a great clamor and tumult raised, and as was natural, the disorderly motion was of so great of an army. And you'll notice Caesar calling out to the soldiers, giving them signal with the right hand to quench the fire. The Roman army's leaders did not want this to occur, but the people, the army, the people of the prince did it. It wasn't by order of Rome. It was not by order of Titus and his commanders. It was the people that made up his army, the people of the prince, as Daniel 9 says. And of course, if we stop there, we're going to just say, hey, this is still a Roman army, so it's still a Roman situation, tying us back to Daniel 2, those legs of iron being Rome. But I'm going to dive even deeper here. First and foremost, let's look, and like I said, I don't have near the time to dive in all of the history, but I want you to take notice of something. It was the army, Titus and his commanders' army. Those men burnt Jerusalem and the temple. These are the ancestral lineage of the prince that is to come. The people of the prince. Well, who were they? Well, according to this, and this happens to be Publius Cornelius Tacitus, just one of the historical documents we have, talked about how Titus, when he came into the region, found 3 legions, the 5th, the 10th, and the 15th. And he also added one from Syria, the 12th. And then also some men belonging to the 18th and 3rd. And I've got a grid over to the right. And I can thank an outside source for that chart. Joel Richardson, in one of his books, had already provided this, so thank you, Joel. But notice where these legions were stationed. So Titus came with and he had his commanders, and he picked up the Macedonian, the Fretensis, the Apollinaris, and I'm sure I'm butchering the Latin names, and then Gallica and Fulmita. Notice where they're stationed. You have, of course, the Macedonian being in Judea. There were 3 of them, the 10th, the 15th, and the 3rd being based in Syria. You also had the 18th being in Egypt, and then you had the 12th being in Asia Minor and Syria, Asia Minor being Turkey. And notice it says, this force was accompanied by a strong contingent of Arabs. So these, at this point, we're still seeing a Roman legion. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 legions here coming in, but they were stationed in that region, the Eastern legions, if you will. And it says that they were also accompanied by Arabs, a very strong contingent. And of course, we have Josephus talking a little bit more in terms of Titus, who came in by land into Syria, where he gathered the Roman forces. So what we read above, that he brought the Roman forces that were there. Once again, Roman, because they had the military gear on of Rome, being part of these legions. And it says, with a considerable number of auxiliaries from the kings in that neighborhood. And of course, this is just a mouth of a second witness with what that was said by Tacitus up at the top about a strong contingent of Arabs. Notice that it says there's a strong, a considerable number of auxiliaries, in other words, extras from the kings in the neighborhood. Malchus, the king of Arabia, sent 1,000 horsemen besides 5,000 footmen, and Josephus described it more. So far we're finding this army is based in the region that goes from Turkey all the way down to northern Africa, and that even Arabian forces were being involved. But there's something more important here. When you dig, and this is where I don't have the opportunity to really dig into the full history, and we could do that if at a later time, but by 70 AD, most of those Eastern legions that we find, the ones right back here, granted, more than likely the commanders and the leaders within each of those were truly Roman from the area that we call Europe today, but Roman. But when we get to the period that when this Titus was bringing these legions, so once again, the 5th, the 10th, the 15th, the 18th, the 3rd, and the 12th, it was from this section that we find here in red. So Asia Minor, what we call Turkey, from the Syrian area, Arabia, and Egypt. But what's more, it says that these armies, granted, once again, the leaders would more than likely be Roman, but the soldiers, the ones that burnt Jerusalem, the ones that burnt the temple, those Eastern legions had come to be dominated by what they term provincials. In other words, people from those provinces, from the provinces of Roman. They were conscripts that were drafted, and they were drafted from Asia Minor, Turkey, Syria, Arabia, which of course you can see on the map. I didn't have to point it out. It's labeled. And we read from the previous 2 historical writings, and Egypt. So the people of the prince that were to come, that destroyed the city and destroyed the temple, were not Roman. They were people from Asia Minor, people from Syria, people from Arabia, people from Egypt. So as we begin to look at this DNA, if you will, this pattern that we're seeing, that nature of the beast continues to have a very unique DNA script, if you will. It's providing us the glimpse, all the way from that head of gold, that it has to have a Babylonian influence, all the way back to Nebuchadnezzar, to where we find it going until Alexander's empire falling apart and his generals coming up, to where we find by the time of the Maccabean wars that took place, that we can read about in the Apocrypha, that we had the Seleucid, the kings of the north, against the Ptolemaic, the kings of the south. And we're seeing, look at your maps. I mean, just what I have here. Look at the maps. We're seeing the DNA record, that lineage that we can look to as we begin to continue to move forward with understanding the nature of the beast. And all of them have a pattern in terms of the region that's being covered. Even the head of gold, we see those same regions of Asia Minor, Syria, and down through Judea and Egypt. Same thing with the Medes, Persians, same things with Alexandrians, and even over when we get to, from Daniel 8. So these people of the prince that are to come, that prince that is to come, the Antichrist, his people are the one that destroyed the temple in Jerusalem in 70 AD. And although they may have been wearing Roman gear and Roman attire, it was not by the orders of Rome that they did it. There was a true bitter hatred within them for the people in Judea, the Jews, Israel. There was a hatred there. So they were provided an opportunity to take out that anti-Semitic hatred on the Jews. And if you get into the history of what truly occurred, it's heartbreaking, but Daniel was told this is going to come because, the desolations have been determined. And of course, so now this takes a whole different nature to when we begin to look at the nature of the beast. Just as I've been mentioning in the previous ones, we probably don't want to look to the West. Matter of fact, I'm going to encourage you, don't look toward Rome. Don't look toward a revived Roman Empire. Everything so far within the DNA. And once again, just as I mentioned before, you cannot escape the DNA. You cannot escape your heritage, your DNA. It's if it's in there, it's going to be part of your system. That everything is pointing to the regions that the maps are showing. And we're going to continue with that as we get into part 5. We're going to touch even further and eventually get into look at how even John himself describes the Antichrist. But that's for a later time. So once again, hopefully this was not too long. I want to encourage you, if you've not had a chance to go and watch chapter 1 or even rewatch the chapters in chapter 2, the previous parts, I'm going to encourage you to do so. This is a time that we're seeing so much unfold and things to come out in front of us that we're seeing that it lines up with the Word of God. We're seeing multiple pieces occur, but at the same time, Matthew 24, he said, let your heart not, you're not to be troubled. When you see all these things, don't worry. But we are to look. It's clearly telling us we need to watch and we need to pray. And we definitely need to love one another. And as I mentioned in my latest update number 2, we need to love one another and not wait to the time of trouble to do that. So let's continue to pray for one another, love one another, and let's continue pressing on. And until that day, earnestly contend for the faith that was once delivered unto the saints.
We've covered a lot today, tracing the prophetic DNA of the beast, uncovering historical connections, and diving deep into the book of Daniel. This is a pivotal discussion, and I encourage you to take your time, reflect, and go back through the scriptures yourself. If this study has challenged you, sparked questions, or even confirmed something in your spirit, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment, share your thoughts, and let's continue the conversation together. Most importantly, as we navigate these times, let's stay rooted in the Word, watch and pray, and above all, love one another. Until next time, keep seeking, keep studying, and keep contending for the faith once delivered to the saints. God bless.
Don't miss out on the latest content. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell so you're always the first to know when a new video drops. And if you love what you're watching, save it for later and share it with your friends. Go ahead, click now